Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jackie Leonard, and in the early hours of Wednesday the 15th of August, these are our main stories. A huge rescue effort is underway in the Italian city of Genoa after a motorway bridge collapsed, killing at least 26 people and burying others under the rubble. A report by the US state of Pennsylvania says more than 300 Roman Catholic priests were involved in the sexual abuse of more than 1,000 children. And President Trump's election campaign is taking legal action against the former White House aide Omarosa Manigault Newman for violating a non-disclosure agreement. Also in this podcast.
As our early ancestors began to walk on two legs, the bones and the feet began to change over many generations. They evolved. And the really interesting finding about this study is that the big toe was the last one to become human-like.
We discover the importance of the big toe in human evolution. As we record this podcast, in the Italian city of Genoa, emergency workers are still trying to free people caught in crushed vehicles or rubble after a large section of motorway bridge collapsed at noon on Tuesday. Without warning, the four-lane bridge collapsed, plunging cars, trucks and their occupants down into an industrial area below. David Capello, a former Italian football player, was driving on the bridge as it collapsed and fell 80 metres. Incredibly, he survived.
I was on the bridge as it fell down. I don't know what saved my life. I swear I fell all the way down just as I was driving. Now I'm in an ambulance. The car is destroyed, but what the hell? I'm okay. I've come out of it with my legs all in one piece.
So far, it's thought at least 26 people have died. The Morandi Bridge was built in the 1960s and was a main trunk route that serves the Italian Riviera and the southern coast of France. Regina Vaidyanathan spoke to our correspondent James Reynolds, who's at the scene, and asked him to tell her about the rescue operation.
Still carrying on behind me. We've seen dozens of rescue workers here, and the police have told us that the rescuers still have to lift several large slabs of concrete under which they may find more vehicles. We've also seen the police and firefighters bring in sniffer dogs to help with the search. The area is lit up. It's floodlit, so that gives you an indication that the rescue will simply continue until people here are confident that there is no one left to be found.
And do we know any more about those who lost their lives in this collapse?
We have been told that around 19 people have been identified, and the police have told us here that they believe at the moment 26 people have been killed, so they will continue to try to identify those who they don't know who they were, and they'll also may expect to continue to find more bodies overnight. It's difficult to tell who might have been using this bridge. Italy's coming up to holidays. It might have been families using this very big road to get to the Italian or to the French Riviera. It may have been people doing one last day work. It may have been tourists as well.
That was James Reynolds at the scene. Marcello De Angelis is a coordinator for the Italian Red Cross in Rome. They've got a team of about 100 people helping in the search and rescue operation, and he told Rebecca Kesby more.
Our units are working, they've been working from the immediate aftermath of the collapse. They are working with, especially with dogs, to locate victims under the rubble, we hopefully alive, and put into security the whole area, because there is a risk of other parts of the bridge collapsing, and we have to put into security also the buildings that have been hit by the rubbles and could collapse themselves, obviously, over the rescue units.
And so far, what sort of injuries are you encountering there?
Well, what we have encountered is just dead people being crushed by the fall itself and the rubbles. So they've been crushed, basically.
So at the moment, you're really recovering bodies rather than survivors?
Yes, we have counted at least 35 vehicles involved in the collapse, which five or six were lorries. So obviously the drivers and the people within the vehicles, we don't expect to find them, alive or simply wounded. And on top of them, obviously, fell the rubbles of the bridge.
I suppose there is a slim chance that people that were underneath the bridge may have survived if they were protected in any way by very strong structures. Is there a chance that that could be the case?
Yeah, there is a chance. I mean, according to our experiences, there might be the possibility of some niches being created by rebels themselves, and with people being eventually protected by the rebels. We are working on this emergency as if it was an earthquake. The units that we have sent are the units that we use during earthquakes. So it is the same sort of situation. And also the risk of other collapses, obviously, are the same that we encounter in earthquakes.
Yes, you say it's very dangerous for your personnel working in this zone at the moment. How is the weather? Because we understand that the weather may have played a part in what happened.
Well, the weather is not good at all, and the whole of the region had been under heavy rain. The fact that this might be the origin, the cause of the collapse, I couldn't say, but it doesn't seem plausible. There must have been some other structural problem, because the rain by itself couldn't have caused the collapse of such a big structure.
Marcello De Angelis, a coordinator for the Italian Red Cross. A grand jury in the US state of Pennsylvania says its investigation of clerical sexual abuse has identified over 1,000 child victims. More than 300 Roman Catholic priests are implicated. We heard more from our North America correspondent, Nada Taufik.
Almost all of these cases are too old to prosecute because of the state statute of limitations. And so Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro said that they would work to put charges on those that they could. But I should also add that a lot of campaigners and some of the victims themselves are trying to get the state's laws overturned. And they're really using this report as ammunition of why they believe the laws should be changed so that that statute of limitations does no longer apply. This report does name several people who are accused of being predators, and the Pennsylvania Attorney General outlined in graphic detail a lot of these cases. One of the cases was 5 sisters from the same family abused by a priest allegedly. One of the girls was just 18 months old and was abused until she was 12. Now, there are details in this report that are still redacted because there was a very long legal fight about not releasing it. So the state attorney general also said that he is working to make sure that they can somehow get rid of those redactions so that there's transparency.
And this investigation went back decades, didn't it? But the church was not exactly forthcoming or open or helpful.
Yeah, this is an investigation that took 2 years. They spoke to dozens of victims. They went through internal church documents, but the state attorney general has accused the church of trying to cover up the cover-up, saying that they were more concerned about protecting their own, not about working with the investigators, the 23 jury members who were looking into this, and the investigators in his office who were looking into this.
And what is likely to happen now, particularly in terms of justice and reparation for the victims?
We have heard now from at least one bishop, Lawrence Persico of the Diocese of Erie. He expressed his sorrow to the victims of abuse from his diocese. He said that they will no longer shroud abusers in secrecy, no matter who they are or how long ago the abuse occurred. And in a statement, he said that they are willing to fund any of the counseling that the abuse victims need, no matter how long ago this happened and whether they even lived in the Diocese of Erie. And as I say, there is a large campaign to see what they can do in Pennsylvania about this, and also to call for more investigations in other parts of the United States.
Nada Taufik. Reports from the United States say President Trump's election campaign has filed an arbitration case against the former White House aide Omarosa Manigault Newman. It alleges that she violated a non-disclosure agreement after writing a critical book about her former employer. With more, here's Chris Buckler.
She's accused the president of being a racist and a misogynist in a tell-all book about that time. Ms. Manigault Newman has called the memoir unhinged and used tapes of secretly recorded conversations to promote it, including one apparently with Mr. Trump. He hasn't hid his fury, going so far as to describe her as a dog and a crazed lying lowlife. And now his campaign team have filed an arbitration case claiming she breached a confidentiality agreement signed 2 years ago. It's an attempt to resolve the row, but more importantly, to try to stop Omarosa from making further allegations.
Chris Butler. Venezuela's chief prosecutor says a general and a colonel with the National Guard have been arrested in connection with an alleged assassination attempt on President Nicolas Maduro. Tarek Saab says so far 12 other people are in detention. Nicholas Rocha has more details.
Tarek Saab said the authorities had issued 27 arrest warrants for the apparent explosive drone attacks on President Maduro earlier this month. Mr. Maduro has blamed them on the opposition, saying 2 lawmakers, Juan Requesens and Julio Borges, were behind the plot to kill him. Mr. Requesens is under arrest and a warrant has been issued for Mr. Borges, who's living in exile. The president said some of those detained had implicated the 2 men. The opposition has described the drone attacks as a farce.
Nicholas Rocha. An experimental treatment for Ebola is being tested in the Democratic Republic of Congo, one of the countries worst hit by the virus. 41 people are known to have died in the latest outbreak there. The new drug has proved to be 100% effective in tests on monkeys. We heard more from our global health correspondent, Smita Mundasad.
The Director General of the World Health Organization says that 5 patients have been given this experimental, fairly untested new treatment. It's called MAB114. It's an antibody treatment, and antibodies are proteins that are normally made in the human body to try and fight off viruses. It was actually found in an Ebola virus survivor, a survivor of a 1995 Ebola outbreak in the DRC. 11 years later, researchers found these antibodies in this survivor's blood. So they took them and they tried to see if they could protect animals. So they tried them on primates to see if they had any effect. And they found that giving a single shot of these antibodies protected the animals. So they're now doing a study in the United States in the hope that it will also protect humans. We don't know that yet, but because of the situation in the DRC, the World Health Organization, the ethics community in the DRC have said, let's try this experimental treatment on 5 people who have the virus currently.
And when might we expect it to be offered to people on a wider scale?
They will be looking very closely at how these 5 people do because, as of yet, they have no data on how effective it is. The early trial in the United States that only started in May this year suggests that it is safe in humans, but we don't yet know if it has the same effect, whether it really does protect people against the virus. So they'll watch these 5 people. I hear from the WHO that there are 4 other similar treatments that are being considered too, and we will have to see what happens during this outbreak. And it appears that every Ebola outbreak there is, and this is the 10th in the DRC, gives a little bit more information that helps fight the next one.
So we're talking about a treatment today. There is a vaccine as well, isn't there?
People are being offered the vaccine at the moment. The World Health Organization said today that lots of healthcare workers have been given the vaccine, that they are now trying to give it to the wider community. But because of the security concerns there, the many armed groups, it is actually very difficult for them to get it to the people that need it. Now, the vaccine, the hope is that it will protect people from getting Ebola. This treatment that we're talking about, the antibody, the hope is that people who already have Ebola, if they're given this treatment, it will boost their immune system and help them fight off the virus.
That was our global health correspondent, Smita Mundasad. Still to come in the podcast.
As I said earlier today, I get angry, and the question has to be asked of these people, what the hell are you doing? Who do you think you are?
The Swedish Prime Minister hits out at gangs who torched more than 100 cars on Monday night. London anti-terrorism police are questioning a man suspected of deliberately crashing into security barriers outside Parliament on Tuesday morning, injuring cyclists and pedestrians. The suspect's Ford Fiesta car was driven from Birmingham in the English Midlands to London overnight before the attack. The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, called the incident shocking. The BBC's been told that the suspect wasn't known to the security services, but was to the police. Our British Affairs editor Mark Easton was in Westminster and witnessed the rapid emergency response.
I was about 200 metres down this road as the incident happened and saw about half a dozen police Range Rovers and motorcycles driving at speed up this road away from the incident. It appears that was part of a planned response to exactly this kind of emergency.
My BBC colleague Barry Williams saw the Ford Fiesta, driven by the suspect, suddenly career out of the early morning traffic.
I heard a commotion and turned round to see a silver car heading towards the cyclists on the wrong side of the road. They were parked, waiting for the lights to change. He hit the cyclist, then swerved over towards where the safety barrier is and accelerated and hit it at quite high speed.
2 police officers protecting the Palace of Westminster leapt out of the way moments before the car smashed into a security barrier, briefly lifting it off the ground. Jason Williams was walking by at the time.
I've seen him crash into the bollard at high speed. He's driving about, I'd say, at least 50 miles per hour. The guy, he seemed very focused. He wasn't panicked or anything. He wasn't crying, he wasn't shouting.
3 cyclists were hurt, among them a woman who's being treated for serious but not life-threatening injuries. Scotland Yard Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu said the driver of the vehicle was arrested at the scene but was refusing to cooperate with police.
Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident. Officers are searching the vehicle and no other weapons have been found at this time. At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK.
Parliament is currently in recess, Westminster occupied by more foreign tourists than politicians. The Prime Minister, on holiday in Switzerland, said her thoughts were with the injured and thanked the emergency services for their courage. The response from police and emergency services to this incident was well rehearsed and well executed. If this was an attack on the epicentre of British democracy, it was very quickly neutralised. Less than a year and a half since the Westminster Bridge attack, once again the area around Parliament was in lockdown. The message to the public: stay calm, but remain vigilant.
Mark Easton. The White House says President Trump is frustrated that the American pastor at the heart of the row with Turkey has not yet been released. But there's been no comment yet on the Turkish president's proposed boycott of US electronic goods. Turkey also said it wouldn't use American products in construction. On Tuesday, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, during a visit to the country, denounced American sanctions on Ankara as unfair and illegitimate. As for the economy itself, the Turkish lira has risen slightly, but as Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul, the problems are far from over.
Listen to the vitriolic exchanges between Turkey and the US these days, and you'd think they were arch enemies, not decades-old NATO allies. After Washington slapped sanctions and tariffs on Ankara last week due to Turkey's detention of an American pastor, the Turkish lira nosedived by 18% in a day. The combative President Erdogan has rejected the interest rate hike that could reverse the fall, so focused is he on growth. Playing to his nationalist base, he's called it an economic war, vowing not to surrender to the enemy. Rather than importing goods in foreign currency, he said Turkey would produce them here. And he announced a boycott on American electronics. You have the iPhone, others have Samsung, we have our Vestel, he cried, referring to a Turkish brand. There is wide support for the president from a nation notoriously obsessed with stories of foreign plots against it, but many also fear the plunging lira. Amid the deepening crisis with Washington, enter Russia as if on cue. Its Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was in Ankara, sensing an opportunity. He talked about Syria, but also denounced US sanctions on Turkey and Russia as illegitimate.
Back to the issue of sanctions. We see them as an illegitimate policy, an unlawful policy. It's a policy defined mostly by a desire to dominate everywhere and in everything, to make everyone dance to a certain tune, without any agreement, trying to get a competitive advantage in the world markets, benefiting only one side's business interests by using protectionism, sanctions and unfair competition.
As Ankara's relations with the West have plummeted, it has pivoted to Moscow, buying a Russian missile defense system and welcoming a new Russian-financed nuclear power plant. Beyond the tweets, the bluster and the boycotts, that is the real issue here, that bit by bit the bond that has anchored Turkey to the West is loosening, and that this fresh crisis is pushing a crucial country ever further into Russia's sphere.
That was Mark Lowen in Istanbul. To Sweden now, and the hashtag Bilbränder, meaning car fires, has been trending on Twitter. More than 100 cars were set on fire on Monday night in cities around the country, most of them in the western city of Gothenburg. Nuala McGovern spoke to Carl Vaneskug, a reporter at Swedish Radio P4 in the city, and asked him for more details.
There were a couple of different places where people put a lot of cars on fires, mostly around the area of Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. So earlier today I was visiting an area called Frölunda, just south of the central city of Gothenburg, and I was talking to some people who had been standing in their apartment watching out the windows as a crowd of around 6 or 7 young persons in black hoodies and masks were crashing the rear windows of the cars and pouring in gasoline and lighting the cars on fire. And as the cars started to get on fire, they also, at some of the cars exploded, the gas tanks getting, burned. And one of the guys I was talking to, he wanted to go out and move his car because it was close to the fire to save the car and not having it also get on fire. But the car next to it exploded, so he had to run back into his apartment again.
And the thing is that it happened in various cities. It would lead you to believe that it was organised.
The police don't want to say that it's organised already because they don't know it yet, so we don't have the fact. But what we do know is that several fires started at almost the same time with just minutes in time difference.
And are you getting reports that it was, the guys with the hoodies and the masks in the various cities or just in Gothenburg?
Well, just in the Gothenburg area, but there were fires at other places too, starting a little bit later.
Who might it be behind the mask?
Well, we have 2 young guys arrested in the Frölunda area in Gothenburg. And the police that I talked to told me that these are young criminals that are from the local areas. And so they suspected that's the case in most of the places. But I got to tell you that there are some theories florating online.
Like what?
That there could be some political extremists from either the left side or the right side that want to maybe affect the elections that are coming up in just a couple of weeks.
And what elections are they?
Well, it's for the governmental elections, so we have a big debate with all the political leaders here in Gothenburg. So both the Prime Minister Stefan Löfven visited the area, also Ulf Kristersson, who is the leader of the political opposition here in Sweden.
It's quite something to see. I'm just looking at video of it as I have you on the line, and I did see that the Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said that it looked organised, and I quote him saying almost like a military operation because you have all the cars lined up and everything is blown to pieces.
Well, yeah. The witnesses I was talking to, they told me that first there were a couple of persons coming up and destroying the rear windows. The next one came with shopping carts with gasoline in the shopping carts, poured it in, and then the next one came with a fire. So yeah, almost a little bit like an army, army operation.
That was Carl Vaneskug, a reporter at Swedish Radio P4 in Gothenburg. Now, if you listen to country music, you'll have noticed that there are a few themes that the singers return to again and again. Thwarted love, alcohol, more thwarted love, and occasionally money. And that's something that the top country musicians are really raking in, according to Forbes magazine, which has released the list of the top 10 richest stars. Lucy Burton spoke to Zach O'Malley Greenberg, who compiled the list, and they started by discussing the artist right at the top.
I'm gonna sit right here on the edge of this pier and watch the sunset disappear.
So that was Luke Bryan there, but
Who is he? I've never heard of him. A lot of people haven't. Just tell us a little bit about him.
He's pretty big over here in the U.S. He's actually the number one earner in all of country music, $52 million over the past year. You know, he's definitely a bit younger than Garth Brooks, Kenny Chesney, those guys who've been around for quite some time. He's a judge on American Idol, you know, so he's kind of got that next generation country vibe. And, you know, he's one of these guys who's traded the cowboy hat for a baseball cap. He's not sort of your traditional guitar picker. He looks more like a pop star than a cowboy.
And you mentioned Garth Brooks, so that seems like the perfect moment to bring this in.
If tomorrow never comes, will she know how much I loved her?
Now that one I have heard of, a song from 1989 then. How on earth does Garth keep the money rolling in, Zach? He's still making $45 million a year.
That's right. Well, he just did this huge 3-year comeback tour. He topped his own record for tickets sold with 6 million on that stint, and there's just an incredible demand. I mean, that's the only way to put it. He plays multiple shows per city, often multiple shows in the same day. I actually went to see him on this tour in Boston, and 2 sold-out crowds showed up back-to-back on the same night in the middle of a snowstorm. So people just love him, and they're willing to go again and again, you know, even multiple times in the same city. And that's why he's up there with $45.5 million this year.
And at number 8 is this chap.
Stealing a young girl's hearts, just like Gene and Roy, singing those campfire songs. Oh, I should have been a cowboy.
So that was Toby Keith. He made $22 million last year. And a couple of years ago, you wrote an article about him, calling him the capitalist cowboy. Why?
Toby Keith was sort of, I like to say, one of the first country stars to kind of take the hip-hop blueprint and apply it to that genre. You know, it was no longer just about the music. It was about what are the product extensions that you can do based on that music. So for Toby Keith, it was doing his own mezcal line. It was doing, you know, his own restaurant chain called I Love This Bar and Grill, named after another Toby Keith song. It was an endorsement with Ford. It was a record label of his own, and he actually still owns part of the record label that Taylor Swift is on.
And finally, we've got the only woman on the list.
Jolene, 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 I'm begging of you, please don't take my man.
That was, of course, Dolly Parton. Now, Zach, how is she the only woman on the list, and why is she still so popular? What is the enduring appeal of her success?
Yeah, you know, Dolly Parton, she's got quite an empire. She has a Dollywood theme park. She has dinner theater establishments. She owns her own music publishing and master recordings. And so even this year when she didn't really tour, she's still up there at 19 million, number 10, the only woman on the list. You know, unfortunately, country is still a very male-dominated genre, a very male-dominated industry. There are some women, you know, kind of on the fringes of this list, but it's one of those things, certainly, that needs to be changed going forward if country's going to really reflect what America looks like. Not to mention, you know, it's still a bunch of white people, and that is not, you know, the composition of America anymore.
You could have your choice of men, but I could never love again. He's the only one for me.
Zach O'Malley Greenberg was talking to Lucy Burton, and we also, of course, heard from Dolly Parton. We need more Dolly Parton on the Global News podcast. Scientists in the United States have found that our big toe was one of the last parts of the foot to evolve. The findings were made by a team led by Marquette University in Milwaukee. Our science reporter Angus Davison has been studying their research.
As our early ancestors began to walk on 2 legs, the bones and the feet began to change over many generations. They evolved. And the really interesting finding about this study is that the big toe was the last one to become human-like. And so, in effect, our early ancestors' feet had a dual function. They were able to walk, probably quite efficiently, they were probably able to run, but also they were able to grasp.
Why did we evolve out of that? Because that sounds like quite a useful thing to be able to do.
I know it does, and that was the interesting thing for me. So from our human point of view now, we tend to think of, well, you know, that's what humans have done forever. We can walk and we can't do much else with our feet. But actually, for over millions of years, there were different species of human-like people which were able to do both of these things. They were able to walk and they were able to grasp. And I suppose ultimately the main explanation might be we became more specialised. So we can run more efficiently now. We can walk more efficiently. But for many millions of years, there were human-like ancestors that were able to do both of these things.
And what's the significance of the findings of this report?
So the ability to walk on 2 feet is an absolutely crucial feature that really enabled humans to become what they are. And actually there's a lot of debate about why we walk on 2 feet, and actually not many answers. So there's various explanations. One is some scientists might say that, well, walking on 2 feet freed our hands to then be able to make tools and to be able to carry things. Other scientists say, well, actually climate change led to loss of forests and we were forced into the open. Or finally, actually, my favourite, I think, is overhead arms. If you have overhead arms, you're able to walk along very thin branches in the trees and so reach other things. And so studies such as this are a small step towards understanding the much bigger question about why we began to walk.
How did they find this stuff out?
It comes down to really clever 3D scans and getting access to the fossil specimens. So they made 3D scans of human foot bones, ape foot bones, monkey foot bones, and then also the really hard ones are the getting hold of the human fossils of different species from many millions of years ago, and then comparing them on an evolutionary tree. And they're really trying to work out the sequence of events, so how things changed over time to become what we are now.
And is there any suggestion that the feet of modern humans are still evolving, or we still have somewhere to go?
Well, that goes beyond what this study suggests, I think. But, we can speculate. And, I think almost certainly they are evolving, but in which direction? And that would be an interesting study in its own right, to work out how they are changing or how they might change in the future.
Our science reporter, Angus Davison. And that's it from us for now. I'm off to try to re-evolve some prehensile toes. I'm not sure that's how it works, but still, there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you would like to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, do please send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jackie Leonard, and until next time, goodbye.
Is your home an ADT home? Get ADT today and help protect from break-ins, fire and carbon monoxide. For a limited time, get ADT's lowest rates, starting at $28.99. You can also take advantage of the ADT Go app, which offers safe driving reports and more. Go to adt.com/podcast to take advantage of ADT's lowest rate. With 36-month monitoring contract, early termination and installation fees apply. Excludes taxes and fees. Applies to traditional services only. Certain markets excluded. Licenses available at adt.com.